My name is Elena Torres. I'm 31 years old, and the first time I understood how completely a person could rewrite reality was the afternoon my boyfriend had me served with a restraining order in the lobby of my office building. Not after a screaming match, not after some dramatic breakup, not after I threw his things onto the curb or showed up at his apartment demanding answers. It happened because I asked a question about money. One question, small, ordinary, reasonable. The kind of question asked by a woman who had been carrying a man for so long she had stopped noticing the weight of him. The receptionist called downstairs and said someone needed my signature. Her voice had that careful softness people use when they know something ugly is waiting, but don't want to be the one to name it. I took the elevator down with my coffee in my hand, thinking maybe it was a delivery or some issue with building access. Instead, a process server handed me an envelope. I stood there in the lobby, under artificial light and the polite silence of people pretending not to stare, and read that Adrian Blackwood, my boyfriend of 3 years, 28 years old, charming when watched and helpless when it benefited him, had filed for an emergency protective order against me. According to him, I was emotionally abusive, financially coercive, controlling. His evidence was almost laughable, except nothing about that moment felt funny. Screenshots of texts where I asked why he had spent a ridiculous amount on designer clothes after telling me he was short on his car payment. An email where I suggested we build a budget because things had started feeling less like support and more like free fall. A message where I said calmly that I was uncomfortable paying for luxuries while he kept insisting he was in crisis. In his filing, those became intimidation, interrogation, a hostile financial environment. I read the words once, then again. It was surreal in the ugliest way. Not because the lies were clever, but because they were built out of real things I had said in good faith. He had taken concern, stripped it of context, and dressed it up as cruelty. The order required distance immediately. No contact, no calls, no texts, no messages through other people, no showing up anywhere near him. A hard boundary, signed and stamped as if I were dangerous. I wish I could say I cried. I wish I could say I was heartbroken first and furious second. But the truth was cleaner than that. My first feeling was humiliation. There I was, standing in my office lobby in a blazer I had paid too much for because I wanted to look composed, in rooms where men liked to interrupt me, holding papers that said I was some kind of monster because I had asked my boyfriend where my money was going. My second feeling was clarity, because once the shock passed, the entire relationship rearranged itself in my mind so fast it made me dizzy. Adrian had 4 credit cards in his own name. I was the one covering them. His apartment lease listed me as guarantor because his credit was too wrecked to secure the place alone. His car insurance sat under my policy. Streaming services, phone plan, random temporary emergencies, dinners, late fees, groceries, repairs, promises to pay me back once he got stable. My support had threaded through his life so completely that if I pulled one strand, half his world would sag. And now he had filed legal paperwork claiming my financial involvement was abusive. I looked up from the papers and saw my reflection in the lobby glass. Not dramatic, not devastated, just still. Very still. That was when I realized something important. He had expected panic. He had expected me to call, plead, explain, ask what this was really about, bend myself into one more apologetic shape, and promise to do better. What he had not expected was compliance. Total, immediate, enthusiastic compliance. I went back upstairs without saying much to anyone, closed my office door, set the papers flat on my desk, took one long breath. Then I opened my banking apps. People imagine revenge as loud, emotional, cinematic. This wasn't revenge. This was administrative detachment. Within the hour, I canceled every voluntary payment tied to Adrian's life. The cards were in his name. I had simply been paying them, so I stopped. I removed him from my insurance policy. I ended the automatic transfers I had set up when his rough patch stretched from a few weeks into nearly 2 years. I changed passwords on every subscription I was covering. I took his phone off my plan. None of it required drama. None of it required him. None of it violated the order. That was the beautiful part. He had used legal distance as a weapon, but legal distance cuts both ways. The apartment was the most delicate piece. I wasn't on the lease as a tenant. I was only the guarantor, the invisible adult signature that made his polished life possible. I called the property management office, identified myself, and explained that I was withdrawing from that role. The manager, Adrienne, sounded surprised but professional. She told me there was a notice period. After that, Adrian would need to qualify on his own or provide another guarantor. If he couldn't, the property would begin the next steps. I thanked her, documented the call, and forwarded every confirmation to my personal email. It was almost frightening how calm I felt. Not because I was cruel, because somewhere deep down, I think I had already known this relationship was being held together by my tolerance, my money, and my refusal to count. I had simply never been handed such a clean reason to stop. That night, my phone was silent. No apology, no rage, no explanation. The order prevented him from contacting me directly too, and for the first time in a very long time, the silence between us did not feel like punishment. It felt expensive. On him. I sat in my apartment with a glass of water and the kind of quiet that lets buried truths rise to the surface. Every memory from the past year began changing shape. The tears over his bills, the last-minute emergencies, the expensive things that always seemed to appear right after he told me he was struggling. The wounded look he got whenever I asked for specifics. The way every practical question somehow became a moral failure on my part. I had mistaken discomfort for guilt. I had mistaken his dependence for intimacy. And worst of all, I had mistaken being needed for being loved. By the next morning, the first crack appeared. An unknown number called me. A lawyer. Polite voice, strained underneath. He said he represented Adrian and believed there had been a misunderstanding regarding the protective order. I almost laughed. A misunderstanding was forgetting where you parked, bringing the wrong bottle of wine to dinner, filing legal documents accusing someone of abuse because they asked about your spending was not a misunderstanding. It was strategy. He started explaining that Adrian had run into some complications, financial interruptions, immediate hardship. Certain accounts were no longer being covered. Certain arrangements had changed faster than expected. There it was. Not fear, not trauma, not safety. Complications. I listened without interrupting, then told him I was complying fully with the order. No contact meant no contact. No relationship meant no financial relationship. If Adrian considered my involvement abusive, then the most respectful thing I could do was remove it entirely. The lawyer tried a different angle, softer now. Adrian had relied on me, he said. I answered before I could stop myself. Then maybe Adrian should have thought about that before filing paperwork designed to make me the villain for noticing what he was spending. Silence, thick and immediate. He asked whether I would at least consider a temporary arrangement while things were clarified. I told him no. Not angrily, not emotionally. Just no. After I hung up, I sat there for a long moment with my phone in my hand and realized something else. He was already scared. Not of me. Of consequences. By the end of that day, I knew this wasn't over. Men like Adrian do not file something like that and quietly accept the result when it stops benefiting them. People raised inside manipulation rarely see the line where performance ends and exposure begins. They keep pushing, convinced the next version of the story will work. I didn't know yet how far he and his family would go. I didn't know his friends would start messaging me. I didn't know social media would turn into a circus. I didn't know his mother would step in and make everything worse. I didn't know that the same piece of paper meant to force me back into place was about to dismantle his entire life instead. But I knew this much. He wanted distance from me and access to what I provided. The court had given him one of those things. He was about to learn he couldn't have the other. The second call came less than 24 hours later. Different number, same tone. Polite on the surface, pressure underneath. Ms. Torres, this is Bradley Hutchins. I'm representing Mr. Blackwood. I believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding the protective order. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the skyline outside my office window. Morning light, clean glass. Everything calm on the outside, while somewhere else, things were clearly starting to fall apart. What misunderstanding? I asked. He hesitated just for a second. The order was intended to establish emotional boundaries, not to disrupt existing financial arrangements. There it was again. Not fear, not safety, not abuse. Arrangements. I let the silence stretch long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then I said evenly, the order was very clear. No contact, no relationship. That includes financial involvement. Yes, but... I'm complying, I cut in. Fully. Another pause. Longer this time. My client is experiencing immediate hardship, he said carefully. Several of his accounts have been closed. His insurance... I stopped making voluntary payments, I said. That's not a violation of anything. But he relied on those... And I relied on him telling the truth, I replied. We're both adjusting. That one landed. I could hear it in the way his breath caught before he spoke again. Surely we can find a middle ground, he said. He's willing to amend the order to allow for financial discussions. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. No need, I said. The order protects him. I wouldn't want him to feel unsafe. That's not... I'm respecting his statement, I continued calmly. He said my financial involvement created a hostile environment. I've removed myself from that environment. Now the silence on his end wasn't hesitation. It was realization. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. This was consequence. This could be seen as retaliatory, he tried. No, I said softly. This is what compliance looks like. I ended the call before he could try another angle. For a moment, I just sat there, phone still in my hand, listening to the quiet hum of the office outside my door. Then my screen lit up. One message, then 3, then 10. By the time I picked it up again, notifications were stacking faster than I could read them. Unknown numbers. Instagram, D. Ens. Even LinkedIn. His friends, of course. I didn't open a single one. I didn't need to. I already knew what they said. You're going too far. He didn't mean it like that. You're ruining his life over a misunderstanding. Be the bigger person. Talk to him. The usual chorus. The same people who had smiled at dinners I paid for, laughed in apartments I secured, drank wine I bought, and somehow never noticed where any of it came from. Now suddenly they were concerned. I screenshot everything, every number, every message, every attempt, because a restraining order doesn't just go one way. Contact through third parties is still contact. They were violating the same boundary he had legally demanded, and the irony of that wasn't lost on me. By Monday morning, it escalated publicly. His best friend posted first, a long caption about toxic women who use money to control men, who punish them when they set boundaries, who weaponize support to maintain power. It was dramatic, emotional, almost convincing. Almost, because she made one mistake. She included screenshots. Not mine, his. Messages he had sent her. I didn't even have to look for them. Someone forwarded the post to me within minutes. I opened it slowly, scrolling past the caption until I saw the images. There he was, Adrian, texting her. I told you the order would make her take me seriously. She canceled everything. I can't even use my cards. My lawyer says since she's not legally obligated, she can just stop. This backfired. I read it once, then again. Then I locked my phone and set it down carefully on my desk. Because that moment was the first real crack in his story. Not emotional, not subtle, structural. He had never been afraid of me. He had expected control. And when control didn't work, panic followed. I forwarded the screenshots to my lawyer. I had hired him over the weekend, quietly and efficiently. His response came back in under 5 minutes. Keep everything. Do not engage. This is useful. Useful. That word sat with me for a long time because it meant what I was starting to understand instinctively was now confirmed legally. This wasn't just messy. It was provable. That afternoon, another email came through. Bradley again. Formal this time. Carefully worded. No more soft edges. A request, really a demand, that I reinstate financial support during a transition period. I stared at it for a moment before typing my reply. Short, clean, cold. Per the restraining order, I cannot have any form of relationship with Mr. Blackwood. Financial support constitutes a relationship. I am fully complying with the court order. I read it once, deleted nothing, added nothing, then hit send. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, another message came through. Then another. Then silence. But not the kind from before. The silence felt tighter, like something was building behind it. That evening, I stopped by the grocery store on my way home. Nothing dramatic, just routine. But as I walked through the aisles, something strange happened. For the first time in months, I wasn't calculating, not mentally subtracting his expenses, not wondering if I should skip something because his next emergency might come up later, not preparing to cover something I didn't even know about yet. I picked what I wanted, paid for it, and left. Simple, normal, mine. It hit me in the parking lot, standing there with my keys in my hand and a bag of groceries that didn't feel like part of some shared burden. I had been living inside a system I didn't even recognize anymore, one where my role was constant, quiet support, where his needs expanded to fill whatever space I allowed, where asking questions turned me into the problem. And now, because of one piece of paper, that system had collapsed overnight. That should have felt like loss. Instead, it felt like space. By Tuesday evening, the next development came from the apartment. Adrian called, professional as always, but there was something underneath it this time, something closer to disbelief. Ms. Torres, I'm required to inform you that Mr. Blackwood has not provided alternative qualification or a new guarantor. I closed my laptop slowly. How long does he have? I asked. 23 days remaining. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Understood. Please confirm my guarantee ends as scheduled. It does, she said, then paused. There was an incident today. That got my attention. What kind of incident? Another pause. Careful now. Mr. Blackwood came in with his mother. Of course he did. And? Adrienne exhaled quietly. She attempted to submit updated documents, a renewal of the guarantee. My grip on the phone tightened slightly. With your signature. The room went very still. I didn't sign anything, I said. I'm aware, she replied. We have your signature on file. This didn't match. My mind sharpened instantly. And what happens now? It's been referred to our legal department, she said, and local authorities. I closed my eyes for a second. Not out of stress, out of recognition. This wasn't slowing down, it was escalating. Not in a controlled way either, in a reckless one. Because forging my name wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't pressure. It wasn't emotional. It was a line. And they had just crossed it. When I hung up, I didn't move right away. I just sat there, the phone still in my hand, feeling something shift inside me again. Part of me, some small, stubborn part, had still believed this might resolve quietly. That maybe he would pull back. That maybe someone around him would step in and stop it. But this wasn't someone trying to fix a mistake. This was someone trying to outrun consequences. And people who run like that don't stop. They crash. By Wednesday morning, it was no longer just Adrienne's problem. It had become a family operation. And like most things built on panic, it was starting to crack in obvious, irreversible ways. The message came through LinkedIn. Not subtle, not cautious, not strategic. His mother. Elena, this is ridiculous. You and Adrienne had a small disagreement and now you're destroying his life. Be a woman and fix this. I stared at it for a long moment. Not because it hurt, because it confirmed everything. This wasn't new behavior. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a system he had learned, a pattern rehearsed long before I entered the picture. Minimize the problem, shift the blame, apply pressure, expect compliance. I didn't respond. I screenshotted it and forwarded it to my lawyer. His reply came quickly. They are now attempting contact through additional channels. Combined with the forgery attempt, this strengthens our position significantly. Strengthens, not complicates, not escalates. Strengthens. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer in person. Harrison was calm in the way people are when they've seen this exact situation play out more times than they can count. He laid it out simply. She filed a restraining order based on claims we can challenge, he said. We now have evidence of indirect contact, attempted financial pressure, and, if the property manager follows through, criminal forgery. I nodded slowly. And we could move aggressively, he said. Counterclaim. Civil damages. Possibly more depending on how the forgery case develops. I considered that. For a moment, I pictured it. The legal pushback. The courtroom version of this story. Everything laid out, documented, undeniable. It would be clean, efficient, final. But something in me resisted. Not out of sympathy, out of instinct. Let's wait, I said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. You're sure? I want to see how far they take this, I replied, because they're not done yet. He studied me for a second, then nodded. All right, but document everything. I already am, and I was. Every message, every call, every attempt to bend the rules they had created. Because the pattern was becoming clearer with each passing hour. They didn't think they were losing. They thought they were negotiating. By that evening, the next consequence hit publicly. Adrienne's car was repossessed. I didn't find out from him. Of course not. I found out the same way everything seemed to be surfacing now, through someone else. A post, a caption, another attempt to control the narrative before the truth could catch up. When someone uses money to punish you after you stand up for yourself, that's abuse. There was a blurry photo attached, taken from across the street. A tow truck, his car. I stared at it for a moment, something strange tightening in my chest. Not guilt. Recognition. Because I hadn't taken his car, I hadn't made a single call about it. He just hadn't been paying for it. For months, apparently. The payments I had been sending him, labeled car, hadn't been going where I thought they were. Without my transfers, there was nothing left to cover the gap. And reality, unlike people, doesn't negotiate. Reality just shows up and takes what's owed. The comments under the post were less sympathetic this time. At first, they followed the same pattern. You deserve better, stay strong, she's toxic. But then one comment appeared. Wait, if she stopped paying, doesn't that mean she was paying before? Then another. So he's mad she stopped paying his bills? And another, how is that abuse? I watched the shift happen in real time. Not dramatic, not explosive, just subtle. The kind of shift that can't be undone once people start asking the right questions. The post was deleted within the hour, but it didn't matter. Because once doubt exists, it spreads. Thursday morning, the next domino fell. His credit cards declined everywhere. Apparently, he had gone into a store, something expensive, of course, and tried to use one of the cards I had been paying. It didn't go through. Then another, then another. Panic shopping, someone later told me, as if maxing them out quickly would somehow force me to step back in and fix it like I always had. Except this time there was nothing to fix, because I wasn't there, and legally I couldn't be. The call from Bradley came that afternoon. Less polite now, less patient. Ms. Torres, my client is prepared to drop the restraining order. I almost laughed. Is he? I said. Yes, we can file for mutual dissolution immediately. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling for a second before answering. No. Silence, heavy, confused. What do you mean no? I mean no, I repeated calmly. The order exists for his protection. I wouldn't want to make him feel unsafe. That's not... I've adjusted my life to comply with it, I continued. There's no reason to change anything now. Ms. Torres, he's facing eviction. That's unfortunate, I said. But I can't be involved in his housing situation. That would violate the order. This is unreasonable. This is consistent. Another pause, longer this time. Because now he understood. This wasn't resistance. It was alignment. I wasn't fighting the order. I was honoring it more completely than they ever intended. He needs support, Bradley said finally. He said my support was abuse, I replied. I'm respecting that. He hung up. That night I went to a cooking class. Not as a statement, not as a performance. Just because I could. Because the money I had been spending, month after month, quietly, without acknowledgement, was still there. And for the first time, it wasn't being redirected into someone else's instability. It was mine. The class was simple. Pasta, flour, eggs, hands working something into shape. There was something grounding about it. Something real. No manipulation. No hidden expectation. Just effort and result. When I got home, I posted a photo. Nothing dramatic. Just a plate of pasta and a caption about trying something new. Within minutes, the messages came, not from him, from one of his friends. You're really going to let him lose everything over a fight? I stared at the message for a second, then typed back. I'm respecting his need for protection from my abuse. Would you prefer I violate a restraining order? No response. Blocked within minutes. I set my phone down and sat there in the quiet of my apartment, the city lights stretching out beyond my window. For the first time since all of this started, I felt something settle fully into place. Not anger, not sadness, certainty. Because this wasn't about proving anything anymore. Not to him, not to his friends, not even to the people watching from the outside, trying to decide who to believe. This was about something much simpler. He had defined my presence in his life as harmful, and I had removed it, completely. Whatever happened next wasn't on me. By the end of the week, the situation had stopped looking like a conflict. It started looking like a pattern collapsing. And patterns, when they collapse, don't do it quietly. Friday morning, my lawyer called before I even made it into the office. Charges are moving forward, Harrison said without preamble. I closed my car door slowly. Forgery? Yes, and more. I leaned against the car for a second, the early morning air cool against my skin. More how? There's evidence, he said carefully, that Adrian's mother didn't just attempt to renew the lease with your forged signature. She also tried to add herself to your insurance policy as his guardian. I blinked. He's 28. I'm aware. I let out a quiet breath, something between disbelief and recognition. And there's an additional issue, Harrison continued. She attempted to open a credit line using your information. That one landed differently. Not surprising, but heavier. That's identity theft, I said. Yes. The words sat between us for a moment. Solid, unavoidable. And Adrian? He's claiming he had no knowledge of any of it. Of course he was. I closed my eyes briefly because I could already see how this would play out. He would distance himself, minimize, blame her, frame it as overprotection, misunderstanding, anything except what it actually was. What's our move? I asked. We wait, Harrison said. They're doing more damage to themselves than we ever could. That was becoming a theme. By lunchtime, the story had shifted again. Not officially, not in any courtroom, but where it mattered. Public perception. Another post had gone up. Another attempt to control the narrative. This time it was longer, more desperate, more emotional. Adrian sighed, painting a picture of a man abandoned, financially punished for setting boundaries, left to deal with the fallout of a controlling relationship. It almost worked. Almost. Until someone in the comments asked a simple question. If she was controlling you with money, why were you depending on her money? No answer. Just more comments, more questions, more doubt. And doubt, once it starts spreading, doesn't need help. By mid-afternoon, the post was gone again. But like before, it didn't matter, because the damage wasn't in the post. It was in the questions people had already started asking. That evening, Bradley called again. No introduction this time. No politeness. Ms. Torres, my client is in a very difficult position. I didn't respond immediately. Let him sit in it. Then, I'm aware. He's prepared to formally retract certain statements, he continued. We can resolve this quietly. I leaned back in my chair. And in return, a pause. Then, temporary financial assistance, just until he stabilizes. There it was, stripped of pretense, clear, direct, transactional. I almost admired the honesty. Almost. Let me make sure I understand, I said calmly. He files legal documents claiming I'm abusive for being financially involved in his life, then asks me to resume that involvement in exchange for softening those claims. That's not how I would phrase it. That's exactly how it is, I cut in. Silence. Then, slower now. He's under pressure. So am I replied, except I'm handling mine legally. Another pause. He's going to lose his apartment. That's unfortunate. He has nowhere else to go. That's not something I can be involved in. You're being inflexible. I'm being consistent? That word again. Consistent. It seemed to frustrate them more than anything else because consistency leaves no room to negotiate, no cracks to push through. This isn't going to end well, Bradley said finally. I looked out the window, watching the city move in slow, indifferent patterns below. It already has, I said, and I hung up. That night, something else surfaced. Not from Adrian, not from his friends. From his past. A message request from someone I didn't recognize at first. Then the name clicked. Frederick Blackwood. His father. We had never spoken before, not once in 3 years. I opened the message slowly. Elena, this is Frederick, Adrian's father. I heard about what's happening. I'm not reaching out to interfere. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I've seen this before. I read that line twice, then continued. His mother did the same thing to me during our divorce. False accusations, financial pressure, forged documents. It escalates until it doesn't work anymore. Then it moves on. Something cold settled in my chest. Not shock. Recognition. Because suddenly everything made sense in a way it hadn't before. This wasn't new. This wasn't a breakdown. This was a repeat. You're doing the right thing by not engaging. Don't give in. It doesn't fix anything. It just resets the cycle. I sat there for a long moment after reading it because that message didn't just explain Adrian. It reframed the entire situation. I hadn't been dealing with one person. I had been dealing with a system. And systems don't change because you ask them to. They change when they stop working, I replied briefly. Thank you. Nothing more, nothing less. By Saturday, the financial cracks had turned into something more visible. Adrian's lifestyle, everything that had once looked effortless, was starting to collapse under the weight of reality. Not dramatically, not all at once, but piece by piece. Subscriptions gone, cards declining, expenses catching up. And underneath it all, something much simpler. No one left to absorb the impact. That afternoon, I checked my accounts. Out of habit, out of curiosity. For the first time, the numbers didn't feel tight, didn't feel stretched, didn't feel like they were being pulled in directions I couldn't control. They just were. Stable, predictable, mine. I transferred a portion into savings, increased my investments, booked another cooking class. Small things, normal things, things that had nothing to do with anyone else's chaos. And that's when it hit me. I hadn't just been supporting him. I had been buffering him from reality. Every missed payment, every bad decision, every moment where consequences should have landed. I had been there, quietly and consistently, softening the impact. And now, there was nothing left between him and the outcome of his own choices. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because everything was resolved, but because for the first time, it wasn't my responsibility to resolve it. By the time the second week started, the story wasn't just slipping out of their control. It was turning on them. And the more they tried to fix it, the worse it became. Monday morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from unknown numbers and a message from Harrison. Don't engage, something's circulating. That was enough to make me sit up. I opened my phone and found it within seconds. A fundraising page. Adrian, front and center. A carefully written story about surviving emotional and financial abuse, about finding the courage to stand up to a controlling partner, about being cut off and left without support after finally choosing independence. It was almost impressive. The way he framed it, the way he rewrote everything. I read it slowly, line by line. Then I saw the number, $73. That was all he had raised in 3 days. I exhaled softly, because even manipulation needs an audience willing to believe it. And something told me that audience was getting smaller. Then I scrolled down to the comments. At first, the usual, stay strong, you deserve better. But then screenshots started appearing. His own posts, designer clothes, expensive dinners, trips, captions about being spoiled, about being taken care of, about being grateful for a partner who always shows up. The timeline was recent, very recent, too recent. The story collapsed in real time. Within hours, the page was flagged. By evening, it was gone. I didn't report it. I didn't need to. Truth has a way of surfacing when people push too hard in the wrong direction. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. His father called. Not a message this time. An actual call. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Elena. His voice was calm, steady, very different from everything else surrounding this situation. I won't keep you long, he said. I just wanted to say, you handled this better than I did. I didn't speak. I let him continue. When his mother did this to me, I fought it, argued, tried to fix it, thought if I explained enough, things would go back to normal. A pause. They don't. I looked out the window, the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass. They escalate, he continued, until it stops working. I already knew that. I had been watching it happen in real time. He's not going to stop yet, he added. Not until something forces him to. I closed my eyes for a second. What kind of something? I asked quietly. Consequences, he said simply. And then, you're letting those happen. That's why this is different. We said goodbye shortly after. No drama, no lingering conversation, just clarity. By Wednesday, that clarity turned into something else, something unavoidable. Adrian showed up at my office. I didn't see him at first. Security did. I had already informed them about the restraining order the day it was filed, provided a copy, made sure there was no confusion about what it meant. So when he walked in, emotional, desperate, trying to push past the front desk, they stopped him. I got the call seconds later. Ms. Torres, there's someone here asking for you. I already knew who it was. I have a restraining order against him, I said calmly. Please handle it accordingly. There was a pause. Then, understood. I stayed in my office, didn't go down, didn't look, didn't engage. Because that was the point. No contact meant no contact, even when it was inconvenient, even when it was emotional, even when it would have been easier to just talk. Minutes later, I heard raised voices from downstairs. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Then silence. Then sirens. I didn't move, didn't go to the window, didn't check my phone. I just sat there, hands folded on my desk, staring at nothing. Because I already knew how this ended. He had filed the order. He had defined the boundary. And now he had broken it. That evening, Harrison called. He was arrested, he said. I nodded slowly. For violating the restraining order? Yes. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Not out of relief. Out of finality. Because that single decision changed everything. Not emotionally, legally. There was no more gray area, no more misunderstanding, no more narrative to twist. Just fact. He had crossed the line he created. And the system responded exactly the way it was designed to. But it didn't stop there. It never did. The next day, his mother held a press conference. I wish I was exaggerating. I'm not. Outside the courthouse. 3 reporters, 1 microphone, and a speech about financial abuse in modern relationships. I watched the video later, not because I wanted to, but because someone sent it to me. She stood there, composed and controlled, speaking about how men are often victims of financial manipulation, how women use money as power, how her son had been trapped in a toxic dynamic and was now suffering for standing up for himself. It might have worked, if not for one question. Ma'am, aren't you currently under investigation for forgery and identity theft? Silence. A flicker. Then, that's not relevant. Another reporter pushed. But didn't you attempt to sign documents using Ms. Torres's name? Her composure cracked slightly. I was protecting my son. The clip ended shortly after. It didn't need more. Because once that contradiction was out there, the rest didn't matter. You can't claim abuse while committing fraud. You can't claim protection while breaking the law. And you definitely can't control a narrative once reality starts pushing back. By Friday, the final piece fell into place. The apartment. Adrian called again, formal this time. Ms. Torres, I'm required to inform you that Mr. Blackwood has been formally evicted as of this morning. I closed my laptop slowly. How long does he have? 48 hours to vacate. I nodded. Understood. There was a pause. Then, he attempted to apply for other properties, but with his current credit and recent arrest. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. When I hung up, I sat there for a long moment. Because that was it. Not the emotional ending, not the closure people expect, but the structural one. The system had caught up. The version of his life that existed because I held it together was gone, and there was nothing left to replace it. That night, I stood by my window, looking out at the city lights again. The same view, the same quiet. But everything felt different. Not because something had been added, because something had been removed. The noise, the pressure, the constant invisible responsibility. And in its place, space. The ending, when it came, was quieter than I expected. Not softer, just quieter. After 2 straight weeks of calls, screenshots, legal language, public posts, pressure campaigns, accidental confessions, forged documents, 1 arrest, and a failed attempt to turn victimhood into fundraising. The final shape of the story was almost plain. Adrian moved back in with his mother, a 1-bedroom apartment in a bad part of town, according to the version that reached me through mutual acquaintances and people who suddenly found me very easy to update once the narrative had shifted. It was a sharp fall from the polished apartment I had guaranteed for him, the one he used to photograph from flattering angles, as if it were proof of his taste, instead of proof of my signature. The restraining order stayed in place. That, somehow, was the detail I appreciated most. He had tried to have it dismissed after his arrest, but the judge had no interest in rewarding chaos. Once the court saw that he had violated the order he himself had filed, whatever moral theater he had hoped to perform collapsed into something much less glamorous: instability. The judge ruled that the order would remain active for both parties' protection. I remember laughing when Harrison told me, not loudly, just once. A short, stunned sound at the sheer elegance of it. The document Adrian had used as a threat was now an inconvenience to him and a shield to me. He had wanted legal distance with financial access. The court gave him only half. Rick, his new lawyer, because Bradley had stepped away the moment the forgery and identity theft pieces started smelling like professional contamination, made one final attempt to contact my attorney. It was almost insulting in its absurdity. Adrian, he said, was prepared to sign a statement clarifying that some of the original abuse allegations had been exaggerated if I agreed to provide 6 months of financial assistance while he stabilized. When Harrison repeated that to me, I actually put my coffee down so I wouldn't spill it. Exaggerated? I asked. That was the word. And the 6 months? He gave a dry little laugh. Apparently your financial support would help with his rehabilitation. Rehabilitation from what? Harrison paused, then said, I believe the phrase was financial adjustment disorder. I stared at the wall for a full second. That's not a real thing. No, he said, it is not. I stood in my kitchen, phone at my ear, morning light coming through the windows, and felt something inside me settle for good. Not because their offer was offensive, because it was familiar. Same structure, same logic, same desperation wearing a different coat. Lie. Apply pressure. Repackage the lie. Ask for money. I told Harrison no. Not a complicated no. Not an angry no. Just no. No negotiation, no assistance, no revisionist trade. No paying to be called less abusive by a man who had built that accusation out of my refusal to ignore his spending. If he wanted to live inside the story he had filed, then he could live inside all of it. After that, the calls stopped. Not immediately, but almost. The third-party messages dried up. The dramatic post became vague and then disappeared altogether. His friends stopped treating me like a villain and started treating me like someone they preferred not to make eye contact with in public, which, as transformations go, was subtle but satisfying. A few weeks later, I ran into Chloe at Whole Foods. Of course, it was Whole Foods. Something about public awkwardness always seems to happen near overpriced produce. She saw me at the end of the cereal aisle and did that small human flinch people do when they hope they can still escape being recognized. But we had already made eye contact, and there was nowhere graceful for either of us to go from there. So I gave her a polite smile. How's Adrian? I asked. Not sweetly, not sharply. Honestly, because by then I was curious in the way people become curious about storms after they've already passed overhead. Chloe looked uncomfortable almost instantly. He's figuring things out, she said. I nodded. Living with his mom? Her expression confirmed it before she answered. Yeah. I reached for a box of tea and glanced at the ingredients as if we were discussing weather. Working? A retail job, I think. Good for him. She looked at me then, properly, maybe expecting sarcasm. There wasn't any. I meant it. Work is good for people who have confused dependency with identity. Consequences are clarifying. Rent paid with your own money has a way of rearranging the soul. Chloe shifted her basket from one hand to the other. He really did care about you, she said quietly. He just got scared when you started asking about money. I looked at her. Scared. That word again. The soft word. The forgiving word. The word people use when they want fear to sound cleaner than manipulation. Scared enough to file false legal documents? I asked. She winced. That was mostly his mom's idea. Was it also his mom's idea to keep spending my money while telling me he was broke? No answer. Was it his mom's idea to let me guarantee his apartment, cover his cards, pay his insurance, take on the responsibility, and then call me abusive the second I asked a question? Chloe lowered her eyes. It sounds bad when you say it like that. I held her gaze a second longer. How else would you say it? She didn't have an answer because there wasn't one. We parted a minute later with the kind of stiff politeness people mistake for closure. It wasn't closure. It was simply the end of usefulness. She no longer had a narrative to defend, and I no longer had any reason to help her find one. After that, the updates came to me the way gossip always does when it's no longer dangerous to tell the truth. Lois pleaded guilty to forgery, probation, community service, a permanent stain where there had once been a smug certainty that she could talk her way around consequences the way she always had. The attempted identity theft didn't disappear either. Even when charges shifted and negotiations narrowed, the record of what she had tried to do remained. That mattered to me more than the punishment. Adrian's credit score dropped so low it became almost symbolic. He was still living with Lois, still working, still scrambling, and, according to Frederick, already circling a new woman with the same blend of charm, need, and wounded boy vulnerability that had worked so well on me in the beginning. Frederick called one last time, brief as ever. He's moved on to someone new, he said. Poor girl. I stood by my kitchen counter, espresso machine humming behind me, the nice one I had bought myself with a fraction of what I used to spend every month propping Adrian up, and closed my eyes for a moment. Not because I felt jealous, because I felt sorry for her. Not enough to intervene. I had learned that lesson, but enough to understand the shape of what might be coming. When we ended the call, I made myself a coffee and stood there in the warmth of my own apartment, surrounded by things that were paid for, chosen, and kept entirely by me. That became the real aftermath, not the legal ending, the financial one. I took the money I had been spending on Adrian, roughly $3,500 a month once I stopped pretending not to total it, and redirected it into my own life. I increased my retirement contributions, built an actual investment portfolio instead of talking vaguely about one while funding someone else's chaos, finished the cooking class series, started sleeping better, started buying groceries without feeling that low-grade dread of the next emergency text, started noticing how peaceful a room can feel when no one inside it is quietly extracting from you. The biggest change wasn't visible from the outside. It was internal. I stopped explaining myself in my own head, stopped replaying old conversations to see where I could have been gentler, quieter, easier, more strategic, less direct, less threatening to his fragile sense of entitlement. Once the papers were filed, all that vanished. Legal documents have a strange kind of purity. They clarify people. They freeze their intentions long enough for you to stop romanticizing them. That was the gift in all of this, if there was one. Adrian had not just hurt me. He had documented himself. He had taken the ugliest truth of our relationship, that he wanted my support without my scrutiny, my labor without my voice, my money without my personhood, and translated it into court language. Once he did that, I didn't have to wonder anymore. I didn't have to interpret. I didn't have to hope. I could believe him, and believing him set me free. That is the part people don't understand when they hear this story and ask whether I ever felt guilty. Of course I did at first. Women are trained to feel guilty whenever we stop cushioning other people from the impact of their own choices. We're told that holding a boundary is cruelty if the person on the other side starts panicking loudly enough. We are expected to confuse access with love, exhaustion with loyalty, and financial sacrifice with emotional depth. But guilt fades very quickly when facts arrive. He filed a restraining order and called my financial involvement abusive. I agreed and removed it. Everything that followed came from the gap between what he claimed to want and what he actually wanted. That gap ruined him, not me. The restraining order is still active for several more months. Sometimes I think about framing it, not out of bitterness, out of appreciation. Because in the end, it became my favorite kind of souvenir, the kind handed to you by someone trying to trap you, only to discover they've accidentally unlocked the door. He filed it to force me into submission, to scare me, to punish me for asking a simple question. Instead, it gave me something I might never have given myself voluntarily: a clean, immediate, court-enforced break from a man who had turned dependency into performance and gratitude into debt. No long breakup, no circular arguments, no promises to change, no slow withdrawal from a dynamic designed to drain me. Just instant disconnection. Legal, documented, complete. If there's anything worth saying after all of that, it's this: when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. When they show you through legal paperwork, believe them even faster. Do not save people from consequences they created on purpose. Do not confuse your ability to rescue someone with your obligation to do it. And if someone ever threatens you with distance as a way to keep control, let them have the distance. All of it. The whole horizon. Sometimes the strongest response to manipulation isn't resistance. It's total compliance. Adrian wanted me gone, but my money to stay. The court made that impossible. And in trying to corner me with paperwork, he gave me the cleanest freedom I've ever known.